10 Shocking cheating scandals in R&B music history. They sang about love, loyalty, and passion, but behind the glittering lights and chart-topping hits, some of R&B's brightest stars were hiding devastating secrets. Affairs that shattered marriages, betrayals that destroyed friendships, and scandals that nearly ended entire careers. These aren't just rumors whispered in smoky backrooms, they're shocking truths that shook the foundation of soul music forever. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on 10 shocking cheating scandals in R&B music history that will change the way you hear their songs. Buckle up, hit that like button, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence so you won't miss what's coming next. Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross. In the golden age of Motown during the 1960s and 1970s, two names stood taller than most: Smokey Robinson, the honey-voiced poet of love songs, and Diana Ross, the radiant star whose every move seemed destined for greatness. Together they embodied the magic of black artistry, breaking barriers in a segregated America. But behind the music, the glitz, and the carefully curated images of perfection there lay a secret that would one day be revealed, a scandal that intertwined their destinies in ways both intoxicating and destructive. Smokey Robinson was already married to Claudette Rogers, a member of his group, The Miracles, a woman who had stood by him since his earliest struggles in Detroit. Their marriage represented stability, the kind of foundation that grounded him while Motown transformed from a small Detroit label into an empire shaping American culture. Diana Ross, meanwhile, had risen from the projects of Detroit to become the face of the Supremes and later a solo superstar. She was glamorous, powerful, and seemingly untouchable. Yet in the dimly lit halls of Motown's studios, when sessions ran late into the night and emotions bled into melodies, the two found themselves drawn together. According to Robinson himself, it wasn't a salacious tabloid rumor, but a truth he admitted many years later. In his own words, "It just happened, but it was beautiful." That simple statement was both confession and lament, acknowledging a relationship that shouldn't have been yet undeniably was. Theirs was not a loud affair splashed across headlines, but a quiet storm glances exchanged while recording stolen whispers backstage, and nights spent grappling with emotions that blurred the line between passion and betrayal. Smokey had a wife at home, a woman who believed in him. Yet Diana represented something else: temptation wrapped in brilliance, a mirror reflecting back his own artistic vulnerability. The context makes this story even more poignant. In that era, black performers were under immense scrutiny, forced to maintain spotless public personas to survive in an unforgiving industry. They were symbols for a community striving for respect, and any whisper of scandal could be weaponized to destroy careers. For Smokey and Diana, their intimacy wasn't just personal, it was political. They lived in a time when one wrong move could undo everything they had worked for, which is why their affair was nurtured in secrecy. But ultimately, it was Diana who chose to end it. She recognized the danger not just to their reputations, but to the woman waiting faithfully for Smokey at home. She didn't want to prolong what she knew could never be sustained. They didn't destroy each other, but they couldn't save each other, either one, Motown insider later remarked. That decision left behind not a fairy tale love story, but what Smokey himself called a beautiful scar. Rumors later swirled that went even further. Some fans, half in jest and half in speculation, claimed that Smokey and Diana were the biological parents of Michael Jackson. Smokey laughed it off as gossip, but the mere persistence of such whispers illustrates how powerful their connection seemed to outsiders. Whether true or not, the suggestion alone was enough to become a permanent shadow in the mythology of Motown. What makes their story endure is the duality. On one hand, it was an intimate betrayal, an artist cheating on a loyal wife. On the other, it was a deeply human story of two people caught between love and duty, desire and responsibility. Smokey's admission decades later was not about shocking the world, but about unburdening himself of a secret that had pressed on his conscience for years. Diana, for her part, never publicly discussed it, but her silence spoke volumes about her determination to move forward. Half a century later, fans still debate, was this simply two flawed human beings giving in to temptation? Or was it an inevitable connection forged in the crucible of Motown's pressures? In the end, the Robinson-Ross scandal reminds us that even our most revered stars are human. They may stand under the spotlight dazzling millions, but in the quiet corners of their lives, they wrestle with the same contradictions, weaknesses, and longings as anyone else. Their story is not just about infidelity, it is about the price of greatness and the sacrifices made behind the music that continues to echo across generations. Janice Hunter, Gaye and Frankie Beverly, Teddy Pendergrass. When Marvin Gaye released Let's Get It On in 1973, the world heard not just a masterpiece, but also the soundtrack to his personal life. Behind the sensual lyrics and intoxicating melodies stood Janice Hunter, a woman nearly 2 decades younger than him who would soon become his wife. Marvin often called her his muse, and she embodied the inspiration behind some of his most passionate work. But as time went on, the romance that seemed like a dream evolved into one of R&B's most devastating scandals. Janice Hunter was just 17 when she first met Marvin, who was in his mid-30s and already a towering star. Their connection was immediate, electric, and controversial due to the age gap. Yet by 1977, the two were married and raising a family. Marvin's fans adored the image of the gentle crooner with his beautiful young wife, but the reality behind closed doors was far less perfect. As Marvin's fame soared, he became more controlling, and his mood swings, exacerbated by substance use and career pressures, cast a dark shadow over their marriage. Years later, in her 2015 memoir, After the Dance, Janice shocked the world with a confession that revealed the fractures in their relationship. She admitted to finding comfort in the arms of 2 of Marvin's peers, Frankie Beverly, the smooth-voiced leader of Maze, and Teddy Pendergrass, whose baritone had earned him the title of one of soul's most seductive performers. These weren't just strangers. They were men Marvin knew well, colleagues who shared stages and studios with him. For Janice to cross that line added a devastating twist to the betrayal. According to her account, Marvin's possessiveness left her feeling suffocated. He could be warm and tender one moment, then erupt in anger the next. Touring schedules, long absences, and the relentless demands of being a black superstar in the 1970s only heightened the tensions at home. Janice described her infidelity not as revenge, but as a search for the tenderness and freedom she no longer felt with Marvin. Frankie Beverly and Teddy Pendergrass, already icons of the Philadelphia soul scene, represented both escape and validation for a woman trapped in a marriage that seemed impossible to endure. The revelation stunned fans and critics alike. How could the woman immortalized in Marvin's most intimate music betray him with men who were practically part of his artistic circle? The answer lies in the complexity of fame itself. Marvin was at the peak of his career, carrying the weight of being a cultural symbol in a time when black musicians were forced to be flawless role models. At home, however, those expectations crumbled. Janice's actions highlighted the human cost of that dual life. The fallout of her confessions has continued to spark debates. Some argue Janice was unfairly vilified, noting that she had been a teenager swept into Marvin's orbit and placed under enormous pressure. Others believe her choices deepened Marvin's pain during a period when he was already battling personal demons. Regardless, the scandal exposed the fragility behind one of soul's most celebrated marriages. When Janice published her memoir, she wasn't seeking to tarnish Marvin's legacy. Instead, she wanted to tell her side of the story, how love, fame, and control intertwined until cracks turned into unbridgeable chasms. But the names she included, Frankie Beverly and Teddy Pendergrass, transformed her story into one of the most shocking cheating scandals in R&B history. It wasn't just a betrayal of a husband, it was a betrayal of a brotherhood of artists who shared the same stages and spotlight. Do you think Janice's confession was an act of courage to tell her truth, or should she have kept Marvin's secrets buried with him? In the end, this chapter of R&B history has no clear heroes or villains. Marvin Gaye, despite his angelic voice, struggled with anger and control. Janice Hunter, despite her beauty and role as his muse, chose paths that scarred their bond forever. Frankie Beverly and Teddy Pendergrass, for their part, became unwitting characters in a story of longing betrayal and broken trust. Together, their entanglement remains a haunting reminder that even the most heavenly music can emerge from the most human flaws. Bobby Womack and Linda Cook. Few scandals in R&B history cut as deeply as the one that destroyed Bobby Womack's career and reputation in the early 1970s. It was not simply a case of infidelity. It was a transgression that blurred family boundaries and shattered trust across the entire black music community. At the center of it all stood Bobby Womack, his wife Barbara Cook, and Barbara's teenage daughter Linda. To understand the magnitude of the scandal, we must start with the legacy of Sam Cooke, the gospel soul pioneer often called the King of Soul. When Sam was murdered in 1964, his widow Barbara was left grieving, raising children, and navigating life without one of music's greatest voices. Bobby Womack, a young guitarist mentored by Sam, stepped in as a support. Just a year later, in 1965, Bobby married Barbara, a move that shocked many who believed it was too soon after Sam's death. Even though the marriage was controversial, Bobby's career blossomed. He released hits like That's the Way I Feel About Cha and became a respected figure in R&B. But by 1970, everything came crashing down. Barbara discovered that Bobby, her second husband, had developed an inappropriate relationship with her daughter Linda Cook, who was just 17 at the time. The revelation exploded like a bomb inside the family. This wasn't just betrayal of a wife, it was a scandal that tore apart the family of Sam Cooke, whose legacy was sacred in the black community. The fallout was immediate and violent. According to multiple accounts, Barbara confronted Bobby, and in the heat of anger, she pulled out a gun and shot at him. He survived the incident, but their marriage ended in 1971. The Cook family, already devastated by the loss of Sam, now felt doubly betrayed. Bobby's music, once celebrated, became tainted by whispers of this scandal. Radio stations grew hesitant to play his songs, promoters canceled shows, and friends in the industry distanced themselves. What made the story even darker was Linda's age and vulnerability. Barely out of adolescence, she was pulled into a situation that placed her in the center of adult conflicts far larger than herself. The press seized on the scandal, framing Linda not as a victim of circumstance, but as a participant in an affair which only deepened the family's humiliation. Years later, Linda would marry Bobby's younger brother, Curtis Womack, further entangling an already complicated web of relationships. For Bobby, the price was immense. His talent as a singer-songwriter was undeniable. He penned classics recorded by Wilson Pickett, Janis Joplin, and even the Rolling Stones' It's All Over Now. But in the eyes of many fans, his betrayal of the Cook family could never be forgiven. He became an outcast in his own community, and for years his career stalled under the weight of the scandal. Looking back, the Bobby Womack-Linda Cook affair wasn't just about personal choices. It reflected the fragility of trust in a community still healing from the violent loss of Sam Cooke. Bobby, who should have been a protector and pillar of strength, instead became the source of fresh wounds. Barbara, who had already endured the pain of widowhood, now endured the humiliation of betrayal in her own home. And Linda, too young to understand the lifelong consequences, carried the stigma of a scandal she didn't fully create. This story remains one of the most haunting episodes in R&B history. It reminds us that fame cannot shield anyone from destructive decisions, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals come not from enemies, but from those closest to home. Betty LaVette and Ted White. When Betty LaVette published her memoir, A Woman Like Me, in 2012, she did more than recount her turbulent rise and fall in the music industry. She detonated one of R&B's most controversial revelations, her admission of a one-night affair with Ted White, the then husband of Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul herself. For decades, fans had admired Aretha's public image of strength and dignity, unaware of the fractures in her personal life. LaVette's confession cracked open a hidden chapter that redefined how people viewed both Aretha's marriage and the secretive culture of Motown. Ted White had married Aretha Franklin in 1961 when she was just 19 years old and beginning her ascent into superstardom. He quickly became her manager, but his reputation was clouded by allegations of infidelity gambling and abusive behavior. By the mid-1960s, their marriage was already plagued with tension. Behind the curtain of Aretha's meteoric rise with hits like Respect and Chain of Fools dominating the charts was a household in turmoil. Enter Bettye LaVette, a Detroit-born soul singer known for her raw voice and fiery personality. Though not as commercially successful as Aretha, she was deeply connected to the same circles of producers, promoters, and musicians. In her memoir, Bettye revealed that during one particularly chaotic stretch of the late 1960s, she had a brief sexual encounter with Ted White. It was not presented as a romance or long-term affair, but as a moment of weakness that symbolized how power, temptation, and music collided in Motown's backrooms. For readers, this revelation was a bombshell. To betray Aretha Franklin, an artist seen not only as a singer, but as a symbol of black pride and womanhood during the civil rights era, was unthinkable. Yet Bettye wrote with startling frankness, describing how Ted White exuded a mix of danger and charm qualities that had also ensnared Aretha in a volatile marriage. For Bettye, the encounter was less about love and more about survival in an industry where men like White often wielded disproportionate power over female artists. The impact of her memoir went beyond personal gossip. It painted a darker picture of Motown and the R&B world, a place where young women were often forced to navigate predatory relationships if they wanted to advance their careers. Bettye didn't spare herself either. She admitted her choices came with consequences and fueled the turbulence that defined her career. Aretha Franklin never publicly addressed Bettye's confession. True to her nature, she often avoided commenting on personal drama, preferring to let her music speak. Ted White himself also remained silent. But the audience reaction was split. Some criticized Bettye for tarnishing Aretha's legacy, while others praised her for telling an unfiltered truth about the music industry's hidden realities. This scandal didn't just expose a fleeting act of infidelity. It revealed the fragility of Aretha's marriage, the toxicity of Ted White's influence, and the lengths to which women in the industry sometimes went to survive. While Aretha went on to divorce White in 1969 and secure her title as the Queen of Soul, the shadow of his behavior and Bettye's admission reminded fans that even legends endured private heartbreak. In the end, Bettye LaVette's honesty became both a curse and a redemption. She reignited interest in her long-overlooked career, but also cemented her role in one of R&B's most shocking cheating scandals. Her story is a reminder that the world of soul music, while celebrated for its beauty and empowerment, was also built on compromises, betrayals, and scars that still echo in its history. Whitney Houston and Eddie Murphy. On July 18, 1992, Whitney Houston walked down the aisle to marry Bobby Brown. Cameras flashed, fans cheered, and the world watched as the voice of a generation tied the knot with one of R&B's most unpredictable stars. Yet behind the fairy tale images, a rumor persisted, one so dramatic that it has lived on for decades. According to industry whispers, Eddie Murphy, Hollywood's biggest comedic actor at the time, called Whitney on her wedding day and begged her not to go through with it. The supposed phone call was never recorded, never confirmed, and never denied outright. Still, it became part of R&B folklore, the kind of story that was repeated in barbershops, radio stations, and gossip columns. The alleged message was simple: don't do it. It's a mistake. If true, it was a last-minute intervention that could have altered the course of Whitney's life. At the time, the contrast between the two men was stark. Eddie Murphy was a global superstar. His films Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America had made him one of the most bankable names in Hollywood. He was suave, polished, and wealthy. Bobby Brown, on the other hand, had made his name with New Edition and his solo album Don't Be Cruel, but his reputation was already marred by drugs arrests and a rebellious persona. For fans, the idea that Whitney had chosen Bobby over Eddie felt like a tragedy waiting to happen. The rumor gained traction because Whitney and Eddie were known to be close. They had been spotted together at parties, charity events, and industry gatherings in the late 1980s. Though they were never publicly confirmed as a couple, many insiders believed they had dated casually. The possibility that Eddie harbored deeper feelings only to watch her marry another man gave the story irresistible weight. Looking back, the trajectory of Whitney and Bobby's marriage only fueled the gossip. Their union was marked by turmoil, drug use, violent arguments, and legal troubles that overshadowed Whitney's brilliance as one of the greatest vocalists of all time. In hindsight, the alleged warning call seemed almost prophetic, a ghostly echo of a safer path Whitney might have taken. Of course, Eddie Murphy himself never confirmed the rumor. In interviews, he sidestepped questions with humor or silence. Whitney, too, never addressed it directly. Friends of both stars gave conflicting accounts. Some claimed the call happened, others insisted it was fabricated by tabloids hungry for scandal. The truth remains lost in the haze of celebrity myth-making. What makes this story so powerful is its ambiguity. Fans are left wondering what might have happened if Whitney had listened, if she had chosen stability with Eddie over the chaos of life with Bobby. Would her career have lasted longer? Would her personal struggles have been less severe? Or was her destiny always going to be turbulent regardless of who stood at the altar? In the end, this scandal is less about facts and more about symbolism. It represents the eternal question of what if, the haunting possibility that one phone call could have changed music history. Whitney Houston's marriage to Bobby Brown remains one of the most infamous unions in R&B, and the shadow of Eddie Murphy's rumored intervention only adds another layer to the tragic legend of a woman whose voice soared higher than anyone's, but whose personal life was marked by heartbreaking lows. Billy Paul and Mrs. Jones. In 1972, a smooth saxophone intro flowed into the airwaves, followed by Billy Paul's velvet voice confessing, "Me and Mrs. Jones, we got a thing going on." With those words, one of the most shocking cultural scandals in R&B history was born. Unlike the whispered affairs of stars behind closed doors, this scandal wasn't about a secret romance revealed in tabloids. It was a full-blown love affair immortalized in song and broadcast on radios across America. Billy Paul hadn't just sung about infidelity, he had turned it into a chart-topping anthem. The track, released on Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff's Philadelphia International label, became an instant sensation. Within weeks of its release, it soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and remained there for 3 weeks. It went on to sell more than 2 million copies and earned Paul a Grammy Award for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance in 1973. But behind the accolades lay a firestorm of controversy. America in the early 70s was still a society deeply rooted in traditional values where marriage was sacred and adultery was taboo. And here was a song that didn't condemn cheating, it romanticized it. Billy Paul described two lovers meeting at the same cafe at the same time every day, knowingly doing wrong but unable to stop. Listeners were stunned. This wasn't subtle metaphor, it was blatant storytelling of an extramarital affair wrapped in soulful melodies. For conservatives, it was scandalous, even immoral. For others, it was revolutionary. The song acknowledged a truth many lived, but no one dared to say aloud. Affairs were happening everywhere, even in the polished, respectable world of middle-class America. Interestingly, the song wasn't purely fictional. Billy Paul admitted in interviews that it was inspired by real-life stories Gamble and Huff had witnessed in Philadelphia, married men and women sneaking away for daily rendezvous. The vagueness of Mrs. Jones only fueled the intrigue. Who was she? Was she real? Could she be the listener's neighbor, friend, or coworker? The anonymity made the song even more scandalous, allowing anyone to insert themselves into the narrative. Despite the backlash, Me and Mrs. Jones became one of the defining songs of the decade. Its success marked a turning point in R&B, showing that the genre could not only capture love and heartbreak, but also dive into the messy, complicated corners of human relationships. Billy Paul, previously a relatively unknown jazz soul singer, suddenly became a household name. Yet ironically, the scandal surrounding the song pigeonholed him. While the single made him immortal, he struggled to replicate its success, and critics often reduced his career to that one shocking anthem of infidelity. Culturally, the song resonated because it hit a nerve. For a generation dealing with changing norms in the 1970s, post-sexual revolution, post-civil rights movement, the song mirrored a world in transition. Marriage wasn't as untouchable as before, and music was beginning to reflect that new reality. Some praised Paul for his honesty, others accused him of normalizing betrayal. Either way, the song forced listeners to confront uncomfortable questions about love, fidelity, and desire. Half a century later, Me and Mrs. Jones remains a classic. Its opening notes still draw knowing smiles. Its lyrics still spark debates. Was it scandal art or both? For Billy Paul, it was the song that secured his place in R&B history, but it also left him forever tied to a tale of forbidden love that the world could never stop humming. Stevie Wonder repeated from Bettye LaVette's memoir. When most people think of Stevie Wonder, they think of purity in music, an unmatched genius who, despite losing his sight shortly after birth, saw the world clearer than most through melody. He signed with Motown at age 11, earned his first hit at 13 with Fingertips, and by the 1970s had become a cultural icon with socially conscious masterpieces like Songs in the Key of Life. His image was one of innocence, positivity, and artistic brilliance. That is why the claim made in Bettye LaVette's 2012 memoir, A Woman Like Me, rattled fans and critics alike. LaVette, known for her raw voice and blunt honesty, alleged that Stevie Wonder's first sexual experience took place in her house when he was just 16 years old. According to her, this wasn't some whispered rumor, it was an anecdote she recounted with startling detail. The image of a teenage Stevie, still a prodigy finding his footing in the industry, suddenly thrust into an adult world of desire, shocked readers. For decades, Stevie had been portrayed as untouchable, protected by the Motown family. LaVette's words suggested otherwise. The claim was never independently verified. No other witnesses stepped forward, no journalists of the era reported it, and Stevie himself has never confirmed or denied it. But the mere suggestion raised uncomfortable questions about the darker realities of the music business. Was Stevie, like many child stars, vulnerable to exploitation under the guise of mentorship and camaraderie? Or was LaVette exaggerating to add sensational weight to her memoir? The 1960s and 70s. Motown world was known for discipline and polish on the outside. But insiders have long whispered about wild parties, blurred boundaries, and the pressure on young artists to grow up too quickly. Stevie, hailed as Little Stevie Wonder in his youth, was pushed into adulthood at a pace that left little room for innocence. The scandal LaVette described, whether fully accurate or not, fit into a larger narrative behind Motown's squeaky clean facade, was a complex web of power dynamics, temptations, and vulnerabilities. The public reaction to LaVette's story was divided. Some dismissed it as opportunism, accusing her of exploiting Stevie's name to revive her own career. Others pointed out that her memoir contained plenty of uncomfortable truths about Motown that had later been corroborated by other artists, making it hard to dismiss her entirely. What everyone agreed on, however, was that attaching Stevie Wonder's name, long associated with hope and positivity, to a story of underage intimacy was bound to stir unease. For Stevie's legacy, the rumor didn't erase his brilliance. He still holds 25 Grammy Awards, an Academy Award, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom. His work remains some of the most respected in all of music. But for fans who read LaVette's memoir, a crack appeared in the spotless image they had held for decades. Even if the story was unproven, it reminded people that child prodigies in the entertainment world often walked dangerous lines between innocence and adult exploitation. In the end, the Stevie Wonder scandal is less about the specifics of LaVette's claim and more about what it represents. It highlights how vulnerable young artists were in a system designed to profit from them, how easily boundaries could blur in an industry fueled by power and desire, and how myths of purity often conceal far more complicated realities. Stevie himself has never let the rumor define him. His legacy is still written in timeless music. But thanks to one memoir, his name became linked to yet another reminder that even the brightest stars of R&B lived under shadows few dared to speak about. Amanda Lear and Keith Moon. Jimmy Page. Amanda Lear's life was already steeped in mystery before whispers tied her to some of the most notorious men in rock and roll. A French-Italian model muse to Salvador Dali disco queen of the late 1970s and TV personality, she was famous for her allure as much as for her music. But when rumors began linking her romantically to Keith Moon, the wild drummer of The Who, and Jimmy Page, the guitar god of Led Zeppelin, she was suddenly swept into the orbit of R&B and soul circles as well. Why? Because the nightlife and recording culture of the late 70s was a melting pot disco rock funk, and R&B overlapped in clubs, festivals, and experimental studio sessions. Lear was no stranger to scandal. She thrived on ambiguity, never confirming her birth year, often teasing about her gender identity and cultivating an aura of mystery. But in the late 1970s, as disco peaked and collided with soul and funk, she was frequently spotted in the company of Moon and Page. Both men were infamous for their chaotic personal lives. Moon for his self-destructive antics and heavy partying. Page for his string of relationships with young women and his involvement in rock's most decadent excesses. The stories surrounding Amanda Lear's supposed entanglements weren't about romance so much as power influence and survival. In a scene where appearing on the arm of a rock or soul icon could instantly elevate an artist's visibility, Lear's rumored affairs were seen by some as strategic. Industry insiders suggested she used her connections to gain credibility outside the European disco scene, hoping to cross into the lucrative American market where Motown Philadelphia soul and funk giants like Earth, Wind and Fire dominated. Yet the ambiguity of the relationships is what made them so scandalous. Some nights Lear was seen at London parties with Keith Moon dancing, laughing, indulging in his world of reckless abandon. A few weeks later, she'd appear with Jimmy Page, wrapped in his aura of mysticism and guitar-fueled swagger. Were these flings friendships or merely publicity stunts, Amanda never clarified. When pressed in interviews, she would simply smile, offer a cryptic line, and change the subject. That silence only fueled the fire. For R&B fans, the scandal was intriguing because it symbolized the intermingling of genres during a transformative decade. Disco, once dismissed by rock loyalists, was dominating dance floors. R&B was redefining itself, balancing sensuality and social commentary. Rock stars were dabbling in funk, while soul artists experimented with disco. Amanda Lear's rumored connections to Moon and Page represented this cultural crossover, proof that behind the studio doors, worlds collided in ways the public rarely saw. Of course, not everyone admired Lear's maneuvering. Critics accused her of exploiting powerful men for fame, while others saw her as a woman navigating an industry where survival often required leveraging personal relationships. Regardless of intent, she managed to remain in the spotlight, cementing her reputation as a provocateur who blurred the lines between truth and gossip. What makes her story endure is not whether she truly slept with Keith Moon or Jimmy Page. It's that she left the question deliberately unanswered. By refusing to confirm or deny, Lear turned rumor into myth, ensuring her place in the lore of 1970s music scandals. In the end, the Amanda Lear, Keith Moon, Jimmy Page triangle wasn't just a tabloid curiosity. It was a snapshot of an era when disco queens, soul legends, and rock gods shared the same smoky rooms, blurred the same boundaries, and lived by rules that seemed to bend with every glass of champagne. For Lear, it was another chapter in a career built on intrigue. For the rest of us, it was proof that in the music world of the 1970s, genres might have had labels, but lives did not. Usher album Confessions. In 2004, Usher Raymond IV, then at the peak of his career, dropped what would become one of the best-selling R&B albums of all time, Confessions. Within months, it sold over 15 million copies worldwide, won 3 Grammy Awards, and produced hits like "Yay Burn" and the title track Confessions Part 2. But its impact went far beyond music charts. The album sparked a cultural firestorm because fans were convinced that Usher was baring his soul, confessing to real-life infidelities. What was meant to be art quickly turned into one of R&B's most shocking cheating scandals. The lyrics told the story of a man who cheated on his partner, got another woman pregnant, and was now filled with regret. Lines like, "These are my confessions, just when I thought I said all I could say," felt deeply personal. At the time, Usher had just ended a high-profile relationship with TLC's Chilli Rosanda Thomas. The timing was too perfect. Fans and tabloids immediately linked the album's storyline to their breakup, believing that Chilli had left him because of infidelity. For months, gossip magazines, radio hosts, and even television interviews painted Usher as a superstar, airing his dirty laundry in public. But here's the twist: the story wasn't actually Usher's. Years later, producer Jermaine Dupri revealed that much of Confessions was based on his own life experiences, particularly his struggles with infidelity during a relationship. "That's my story." Not Usher's, Dupri admitted, explaining that they decided to weave personal truths into the album to make it emotionally authentic. By the time the clarification surfaced, however, the public had already decided that Usher was the guilty man. The scandal didn't hurt Usher's career. If anything, it made him even bigger. Confessions became a cultural event. Fans debated endlessly. Was Usher cheating? Was Chilli the woman in the songs? Who was the other woman mentioned? The speculation fueled record-breaking sales. Even today, many listeners still believe the album was Usher's true confession, proving how blurred the line between art and life can become in R&B. The irony is striking. Usher was punished by association, his reputation tainted by lyrics that weren't about him. Yet at the same time, the scandal humanized him. The vulnerability in his voice, the pain in his delivery made people feel like he was speaking directly to them. By embodying Dupri's story so convincingly, Usher turned fiction into a lived reality for millions of fans. Of course, Chilli herself has addressed the rumors over the years. In interviews, she admitted the breakup was painful, but insisted Usher didn't cheat on her the way fans believed. Still, the damage was done. For the public, Confessions became synonymous with Usher's name, locking him forever into the scandal of an album that wasn't even truly his story. Looking back, Confessions stands as a paradox. It's both a masterpiece of storytelling and one of the most misunderstood records in R&B history. Usher's career soared, but his personal life was forever entangled with rumors of betrayal. The album remains proof of how powerful music can be, not just in sound, but in shaping narratives, blurring fact and fiction until they are indistinguishable. For Usher, Confessions was more than a hit album. It was the scandal that defined a generation. Behind every silky note and timeless R&B anthem lies a web of secrets, stories of betrayal, temptation, and choices that rewrote the legacy of legends. From Smokey Robinson's beautiful Scar with Diana Ross to Usher's Confessions blurring truth and fiction, these scandals prove that even icons are painfully human. Some cheated, some were betrayed, and some became prisoners of rumor, yet all left marks deeper than the music itself. But here's the real question. Should we remember these stars for their artistry or their scandals? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence.